I was feeling incredibly stiff and painful, and I started to sweat at the same time, and it was like in the middle of winter, so it was ice cold, and I was sweating, and I nearly lost consciousness in the subway. So that was a really dramatic experience, and since I learned that this is not uncommon with ozone, that some people actually can experience such dramatic reaction to their first ozone IV. So yeah, so I do tend to think that I did have Lyme to some degree, but I cannot tell for sure. Then there's others again who say that those who have Lyme disease, why they get the infection in the first place, why they get sick with Lyme in the first place, is because of mercury. Because mercury is known to suppress the immune system. So they say that if it wasn't for the impaired immune system, it would probably be able to fight the Lyme bacteria by itself. But because of the mercury, it can't do so, because the immune system doesn't work properly. And I think this is a very, very good possibility. So yeah. So what else? Oh yeah, another thing, what I do tend to think that I did have some sort of infection is that also years ago I had a very extreme case of air hunger, or the sensation of not being able to breathe. And it was so bad, I was panicking, that I went to the ER. And you know, they did the usual examinations. They did an X-ray, they listened to my lungs and so on, and the doctor said, "Your lungs are perfect, I can't find anything, you're perfectly healthy," right? At the same time, I was feeling like I was literally dying, okay? And the doctor was telling me, "You're perfectly healthy." Great. So again, I decided to take my medicine to my own hands, since doctors couldn't help me. And I bought a small vaporizer. This is a machine which basically boils, no, it doesn't boil actually, no. You put hot water into this container and you breathe it in, the steam, right? And so usually people put some essential oils into the hot water, so you breathe in the essential oils, and they can open up your lungs and just all sorts of good stuff. And what I decided to do is I decided to put hydrogen peroxide into the water. So I was basically breathing vaporized hydrogen peroxide. And the improvement was immediate. And after 1 or 2 days of doing this, that air hunger sensation, that sensation of not being able to breathe and not getting any air, was gone completely. Okay? So again, this is another reason why I think, yes, it could have been some infection in my lungs that caused that, because otherwise the hydrogen peroxide would not have taken care of it. So I know there's some people, some practitioners, who say that ozone can actually chelate mercury, and I would really like to believe that, but from my experience, my extensive experience with ozone and my history with amalgams and mercury poisoning, I think it is very, very unlikely. Like, the way I reacted to the chelators, my first rounds of ALA, was so strong and profound. And at that point, when I would do ozone, I would barely react to it. Okay, it was not the same. It was not the same sensation. So I tend to think that no, ozone can actually not do anything for mercury, and if Andrew Cutler's theory is right, and it seems to be the case that he is, then also chemically, it would not make sense that ozone would chelate mercury, because the mercury binds mostly to the sulfhydryl, I don't know how you pronounce it, it's basically the sulfur compounds in your body. And this is a very strong bond, and in order to disattach the mercury, from the sulfur bonds that it goes into with the body, you have to subject the mercury to even stronger sulfur bonds. And so what you need is compounds which have double sulfur compounds, and those are ALA, DMSA, and DMPS. So only a double bonded sulfur compound, okay, a dithiol, can basically disattach that mercury from the sulfur bond. It goes into with the body, okay. And so if that's the case, then ozone could not do it, right? Because ozone is not a sulfur compound. And given the benefits that I got from Andrew Cutler's protocol, which is based on his theory, it seems that it really works, that this is really the case. You know, that you really need a dithiol compound to chelate mercury. So now looking back at my history of my whole life history of illness, what symptoms did I think that mercury caused? So I think what I can relate directly to mercury poisoning is the fact that I turned autistic during my late teens and quit school, and that is after being an A+ student for basically all my life. I became just this antisocial creature that could not cope with people. I would just feel anxiety and angst 24/7. Like when I would look at a person's face, I would not be able to tell what is going on with that person. Like when they were, you know, moving certain facial muscles, I could not understand whether they were signaling to me that they're happy, that they're curious, that they're paying attention. I just became completely unable to read people, and I was never officially diagnosed with autism, but this is really the most accurate, best way how to describe it when I look back now, how I felt and how I behaved and what was going on. What I was diagnosed officially with was OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And it was like constant obsessive circular thoughts that were going on in my head. And I think this is that together with the autism was definitely mercury caused by mercury. Also, there were all sorts of other cognitive and emotional disturbances that happened, that were going on before I was 28 when I got the vaccine. I think all that also was due to mercury. Then I had a phase of suicidal thoughts, I would be very emotionally impulsive. I still am to some degree, but I also see it getting less. Then being depressed, suffer from extreme moodiness. I also, when I turned autistic in my late teens, I also was not able to understand written texts. Like I could literally reread a passage 10 times. I would still not understand what it said. Also impaired mathematical skills I attribute to mercury poisoning. I used to be always extremely good at school in math. I was even teaching math. I was even teaching math at university. And then after that, with years, I found myself having more and more difficulties thinking logically and doing even the simplest mathematical, solving the simplest mathematical problems. Then, as I mentioned earlier, the feeling of anxiety, like from the moment I would wake up till the moment I would go to bed, and even during sleep, I would have nightmares. Then a whole sorts of digestive issues that I had that might have been candida, might have been related to food food allergies like gluten allergy or milk allergy. Adrenal fatigue, I think, was mercury poisoning. Impaired immune system. I mean, I used to get sick 2 or 4 times per year, and each time it would drag itself like 6 to 8 weeks. So a good chunk out of the year, I would be sick. Like most of the winter months, I would be sick, and then I would come out of the that winter would end, and what would start were allergies, like incredible hay fever, just really debilitating stuff. Then joint stiffness, I also think, is mercury poisoning. This overwhelming fatigue or adrenal fatigue. Then having my life move in phases where I would make a lot of plans and be motivated to do stuff, and then a few months later I would fall into total procrastination and shelve all my plans, and nothing would move forward. Extremely dry skin is also a typical mercury poisoning symptom, which I had, I still have to some degree. Also tinnitus. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. Basically, a ringing in my ears. I also had it for most of my life. It will also get a little better during some phases, but it's still there. I actually, during rounds, so sometimes what happens is like it gets really high, like high pitched for like 5 seconds or so, and then it goes back to normal, right? So maybe there's some mercury shifting around, something is adjusting itself during the chelation. So hopefully this will go away at some point completely. Cold hands and feet. I always had cold hands and feet, and also this is another typical mercury poisoning symptom. Also the sensation of tingling in my legs and arms, and many more other symptoms that that probably were caused by mercury poisoning. But I think those are the biggest ones that I've listed here. So yeah, so really, I think that, you know, this my discovery about mercury poisoning, the discovery of Andrew Hall Cutler and his chelation protocol, really changed everything for me. You know, I'm rethinking everything, and it becomes more and more probable and more clear to me that I was mainly mercury poisoned. You know, and then yeah, Lyme could have come in at some point to some degree. I think so, it's possible, but I think the main problem for me was mercury, and is still mercury poisoning. And over the years, ever since I put that, ever since I shot that first video, many people started contacting me who were also equally sick or even much more sick than I ever was. And I could, right now, I could easily list 20 or 30 people who I know who were diagnosed with Lyme disease or who have diagnosed themselves with Lyme disease, who all have a history of amalgam fillings or who had a root canal. Root canal were also in the United States. Many of them were done with mercury. Or a crown. Some crowns are placed on top of amalgam fillings. Or have a history of having played with mercury as a kid, or having worked in a laboratory with mercury, or have broken a light bulb. You know, those modern the wiggly light bulbs. They actually contain mercury. So if you break them, you can expose yourself to mercury by breathing in the vapors. So so yeah, I can list 20, 30 people who had that type of history, or did a test, a heavy metal test, which showed up positive for mercury poisoning, or showed up an amount of mercury bigger than 0.